you think you're going to do this? You think this? You think you're going to get away with this? Like, no, he's not alone. He might be in his room alone, but there are millions of us in rooms alone across the world. Millions of us. And we're coming for you.
Hi everyone. Before we start, I wanted to take a minute to talk about my next book. You may have heard about the story of GameStop in January or February and thought it was all over. You're sadly mistaken. Unfolding online has been a clash between the corrupt practices of Wall Street and the hive mind of the internet. It's a hot, raging information war pitting retail investors against financial giants swimming in corruption and fraud. The trailer is at the end of this podcast, but if you want to help crowdfund the book or just find out more, you can sign up to my mailing list to get access to a preview of chapter 1 or go to whenmoon.com to read more about the book. The first 200 people to pre-order the book will get a free pack of To the Moon crayons with their book. I just want to make a quick mention of our sponsors. Namecheap are one of the cheapest places on the internet to get a domain name for your next website. I've used Namecheap for all the sites I've ever purchased and have found it really easy to use. Spreaker are a rapidly growing platform for podcast recording, publishing, and monetization, with pricing plans as low as $7 per month. A cheap way to host your podcast and start earning from your back catalog of shows. Finally, ExpressVPN is the internet's most trusted VPN. Protect your privacy and watch and view content that is location locked. You could even try watching Netflix from a different country. And right now, they're offering 35% off 12 months of ExpressVPN. Please use the links in the description below if you want to support the show. Anyway, here's the podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am here with Jamie Curran from Tradespotting, a YouTuber, former trader, and a teacher of risk management and a preacher of kindness. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Josh. Pleasure and privilege to be here. And great to see you again.
Yeah, it was great to chat again after our brief interview on your channel. It was good. So before we get started, why don't you give people like an idea of your background in finance and where your expertise comes from?
My expertise is a nice way of putting it. Yes, so my background, well, I got into trading because I was a combination of consistent hard effort and a little bit of luck. I knew that my path to a better life when I was young was through education, and that took me down many roads that gave me the opportunity to start working in investments for an investment bank, for the one that's currently the third largest institutional holder of GME. And there I learned a lot. I'd already learned a lot, obviously, on the way up to it and getting the job, and I'd been offered it when I was at university, so I had known what was coming for a while. I first got interested in finance. I was inspired, ironically, when I was really young, and I read Bonfire of the Vanities, that book where the antagonist describes himself as a master of the universe in his job, and that really fascinated me. And so I went on to see my dad in the 80s growing up with a little grey mysterious box on his desk, which was one of the first home trading terminals. So I was always fascinated with it and interested in what was going on there. And you like computers and you can fix some of them, but I couldn't even log into that one. So I was really interested in it, and I thought and knew that it was a very lucrative career. It was one of the things that you could do that you could get rich at and not work your whole life. So it was something that I really aimed for. And when I got the job, I had really strong feelings of accomplishment. I loved the offices. It was brilliant having such a high disposable income at a young age. And I thought I had a really good life. And I quickly came to learn that actually I was facing constant moral dilemmas. I was having to operate under unethical trading strategies, and the environment I was in was full of gluttonously arrogant people. And the final straw came in 2008 when those same people were crying into their bagels as their computers told them that they couldn't even hit OK because everything they were working on was so far out of tolerance. And I realized that I wasn't doing the thing that I wanted to do, which was to make a difference in the world. And I could tell that if I stuck at it, the difference I'd be making would be net negative. And so at that point, I left. It was after the bank had funded all of my trading education they were likely to do anyway, so I was happy at that stage to leave. And since then, I've been trading independently and learning myself how to get better and better over a number of years, coming up on a couple of decades now. And so that's where I'm at. It's about learning and practicing the things I've been taught in the past, and trying to pass that information on to other people. So that's my background and where I am at the minute. I worked at a number of banks over the years, but always came back to either running my own businesses or doing trading. And when I was, entrepreneurially orientated, those endeavors would have all been funded by trading. So it is possible to do it, and I'd be an example of it. But I also recognize that the industry on all sides is full of charlatans and frauds. So that has been very influential in the message that I took to put across. So it's very much about risk management and preaching kindness as opposed to gambling and be able to make a quick buck. And so that's where I come from in my philosophy.
I love that. I really do. It's maybe I've been listening to too much Lex Friedman of late, but I really actually starting to believe that it might be the way, love and kindness might be the way to set the world to rights. And it sounds so cliche. And if 20-year-old Josh could hear me, he'd be like, "You soppy bastard."
I don't know. I reckon you might inspire him a little bit.
Maybe. But you mentioned there about the culture that you experienced inside the institutions you were working for. And I have spoken to a few people about this. One of the interviews that will be out, I think the one after this is released will be with a girl who works for the BBC now, but she had started her life in finance. And she was very much surrounded by the masters of the universe. And we kind of talked a little bit about it. And it got me thinking about it. Do you think it's the nature of dealing with such large sums of money and such in a career that influences the rest of the world so much that turns people into that stereotype? Or do you think it is the people who embody said stereotype that get drawn into that career?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I saw people change in front of my eyes. But the question is, were they really like that beforehand or not? I'm not sure. Yes, when you're there, it's very difficult not to be susceptible to that solipsistic, you're the center of the world type of feeling, because so many people, there are hard truths that must be recognized, and that what changes the world is often innovation, R&D, that comes from some commercial motivation has brought that into existence. And those companies that go from nothing to growing hugely and changing the world really quickly do that through growth that's often facilitated through the financial markets. And so there's people that are there that make decisions like A or B or C. And to be honest, there might not be much of a difference between any of them. But that one person in that one role has so much responsibility for making that decision that they themselves get full of the idea of self-importance. And you see it all the time. They don't realize, that in that job there is actually quite a high turnover rate. Even for people who are successful, don't stay around for that long. But every new person that comes along does go through the same journey. It's like a slight degradation in their own morality, which is like correlated highly with their own arrogance and, let's just call it confidence maybe, but their own, I mean, it is a fact that they do make a difference. And so you can see where they'd get that idea of masters of the universe from. It's just what they often forget is that they're just one person. And if they weren't sat on that seat, there would be a different ass on it. And although everyone thinks that they're making their own decisions and they've got free choice, often that's an illusion, especially in jobs like this where you're working to a very specific strategy. That strategy, I often find them to be quite unethical, but if you can put that behind you, and maybe part of the way of doing that is by, spending a lot of money on a Friday and Saturday night and so on, and telling yourself like how you're the master of the universe, because you know that really you're making no difference at all. All you're actually is just a cog in the machine, and it's other people that are doing the innovation or the R&D that you're making calls on, and those are the real people changing the world. But yeah, you do see it a lot, and I think you're right in that there's a big part of it must be self-awareness. How can these people be this way and not see it? And I wonder that myself. But when you're in that office environment and you're in that competitive environment and the bonuses are handed out in the envelopes, and on the Friday night, the person who makes the least buys everybody the drinks, and when you might think that these offices are friendly professional places, but there's actually quite intense environment. So you can see that maybe like the fallibility does catch up with people. I certainly saw it and hated it, and other people seem to be able to ignore it in themselves, which is a unique talent.
Yeah, I mean, humans are wonderful at being able to hold like opinions that are completely contradictory, or believe things that are completely in opposition to parts of their own life, but not see it. Like, I guarantee I'm guilty of it as well in some way. Did you, not to accuse you of the same like arrogance or blindness that we've kind of talked about here, but did you find yourself slipping along that path at any point? Like, did you feel that, was there something, or like maybe a moment where you thought, oh wow, I wouldn't have done that 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Or did you have that happen to you, or were you kind of the outsider in a way?
Well, yeah, the way you finished that question off is the way I would have begun the answer. At the start, I very much didn't want to be an insider. That's like or an outsider. That's a big part of what I felt joining the company was I'm brand new. And there's so much aspects to especially that job, which is learning on the job, that you're only going to get the information and get by quicker if the people are nice to you and they tell you how they go about doing things, and you can see it in a way that helps you learn. So you want to be seen to be on the inside. But so much of what you're doing is you'll have a Monday meeting or whatever, and they'll talk about, say, for example, Monsanto and this new genetic strain they've got of a particular type of corn, and how the implications of that are everyone's going to have to keep buying this off them year after year after year, and their marketplaces that are most likely to be sold into are those which most desperately need some sort of sustainable growth, not being constantly on the hook. And how you can see the unethical nature of it in the Monday morning meetings. It's told to you in like a really positive sense, but then you are the tentacles of evil that go out and ensure that whole process works the way they wanted, because you're such a large holder of that share that you want it to work in your best interest. And how that whole thing goes together, the insidious nature of it all, it was just too much for me to handle. And, I grew up in Scotland but moved to Ireland because I faced prejudice here that led to, and I'm back in Scotland now, that led to me leaving. And then when I arrived there, I was on the other side of the same divide and experiencing prejudice there. And so I think that I've always, because of that path that took me to the bank, I already was aware of the nature of being inside and outside, and also had some pride. Again, maybe that's a degree of fallibility there, but had some pride in that I was able to resist just becoming one of these people, to avoid either the self-criticism or their wrath. And so, I think people who've had an experience of being on the outside before are perhaps more comfortable with the concept of it when they see it on the horizon. And it certainly felt like that at the bank. I had a very Jerry Maguire moment at the end, and worked with my brother Rocky. So I was able to, I suppose, that sense as well. Even though I was on the outside, I was always in an environment where my brother and best friend was only ever a few feet away from me. And in that sense, I always had some constant to who I was before I walked in the bank, right in my face. So I was lucky in that sense. And could I say that it wouldn't have happened to me? No, not necessarily. There, for the grace of God, go all of us. Any circumstance could have come up in life that would have been more important, and meant that job then was more important to me. And at that stage, maybe I would have compromised. And I imagine that the nature of compromise is that ultimately it's very destructive. And so if you don't go down the path too far, then you're all right. And I was lucky in that sense. So I can't say it wouldn't have happened to me, but it definitely didn't. And I'm grateful.
But you had that's got to have been at least helpful in that, I guess, if people didn't have the connection that you'd had in your brother or your friend being there, that a lot of people would sort of enter into the room and they would become the person in the room, whereas you kind of had that I'm still me because there's the people from my life. Like people can change very quickly if they're in a new environment, or I don't know, they adopt like different personality traits, or they can be quite malleable to the environment if they don't have those reminders.
Yeah, people, and you know how groupthink works and how group dynamic works. It's just inevitable that over time people will fall into certain roles and so on. And when there's more dominant personalities in certain groups, then they control how everyone else behaves without even necessarily meaning to, or without doing it explicitly. And so it is very common that people will fall into those roles. And you do feel the temptation and all of the motivations that lead to people making the wrong decisions. When you get an envelope on your desk with a bonus in it, and somebody else is getting one, like if there's someone sat to the side of you, this side was me, there was someone getting one there too. And you know that how they've performed, and you know how you've performed, and you did better, and you want to know what's in their envelope because you want there to be more in yours. Yet the whole thing itself is discretionary and not even part of your actual wage. So I felt that. I felt that when the envelopes were getting put down at various times. Like, there better be more in mine than there are in the people who haven't done as well as me, which it was me, myself, subscribing to their value system. And I knew that at the time. I knew that was a little bit of that, and that I couldn't separate that completely from the morality of the decisions that I was making as part of this collective. Like, I knew I couldn't. And it was partly that feeling that even despite my own conscious objections, that I was still complicit. It was part of that made me get angry, that I didn't have free choice, I didn't have free will, and I couldn't change the environment around me to be better. And you can't, it's too insidious. Unless you're in charge, you can't.
Yeah, it's difficult to change something alone from the bottom. But speaking of groupthink, you have been, from the Gamestop community, the most requested guest that I've had. I don't know how many people asked me to try and get you on the show. So I want to take advantage of some of the knowledge that you've got and see if I can, try and get some answers for myself and for other people on a few things, or at least get your thoughts on it. So just straight up to start, do you think there has been manipulation of the price of GameStop or of AMC? Because that is just that's one of the accusations that gets thrown around every single day, basically.
Yeah, this is a common question, and it's difficult to answer because you never know exactly who's asking the question and exactly what position or what knowledge they have. So they're quite shocked when I respond initially by saying every stock is manipulated. They're manipulated intensely, and it's done in ways that so many different ways that even if you knew all about them, you'd unlikely be able to hold them all in your head or look at them happening on screen in front of you. You'd have to have some sort of checklist because there's an intense amount of negotiation negotiation on levels that you can't even see. And in order to hide that or obfuscate certain types of behavior, you have to make moves that would look counterintuitive to anyone trying to investigate what you're doing. So, on these desks, you can just phone up people. You'll have to anyway, all day, phone other people for various reasons, prices or whatever it might happen to be. And depending on what type of fund you're working on or they're working on, there'll be normal conversations that happen. And you'll ask, like, what are you thinking about this? Or how are you guys putting things in that direction? And you anticipate that person lying to you and to manipulate you to advantage of their own trade, and so work around that, and there's that cat and mouse game that everybody plays all the time, apart from the odd one or two who, again, probably will do it at the end of the day. And so there is no honor among thieves, really. And so, yeah, like on the levels of the people who are working in the fund managers, junior fund managers, executives, fund associates, everybody up and down that, they all are aware of the fact that they're trying to manipulate and control the narrative. And that's like with regards to other people at the same level of themselves, never mind the lack of information that will ever filter down to retail. So from a perspective of like, is it happening? Yeah, all the time. How is it happening? Well, that always depends on the context of the security you're trading or the people that you're trading against. And commonly, we all are probably aware by now of CNBC and their not to pick out any one particular aspect of the mainstream media, right? They're not all that different from each other. Fox News, I'm not going to say that they're any better, obviously. But there are these avenues to push a narrative that will reach lots of different ears and cost little or nothing in terms of your effort and reward you'll get in return. And it's so very easy to manipulate the mainstream media, just manipulating downstream actors in the industry. So, you can phone up and, lots of different ways you could do it, but you could influence somebody else to take an action on their account, which at the same time you do something similar, and then you can say, look at this evidence, and you could show that to 5 or 6 other people. And then you could influence more decisions, which various brokers or investment banks ahead of them will then change their own position or make slightly different decisions. And within there, you can tell what their ultimate strategy might be, because you can see the slight adjustments they're prepared to make. And while you're maybe fighting one particular guy, it'll play out as loads of different narratives in the mainstream media. The stock will be manipulated constantly. You'll fade it as soon as the price opens at the start of the day. You'll boost it right at the last couple of minutes before lunchtime. You'll slam it back down again when you come back from your salad. And you'll do things all the time that are exclusively about manipulating the price. And you see it constantly on the markets, and you're looking at the charts. I'm a classical chartist. I'd look at the charts and I'd look at the indicators. I'd look at momentum indicators specifically, and I'd see the divergence, and you can see, well, here's where the strength is in this trend. Here's where it's weak. I've also commonly will have like option flow trades from dark pools up or institutional order flow up on the charts, and I'll be looking at them side by side along with the prices that retail are paying. And you can see quite clearly at times that you'll be paying higher prices for this on institutional dark pools. And while you can't pay lower because of the way that the ATS trading systems work and the nibble pricing and so on, that doesn't mean that there isn't a potential for extreme amounts of manipulation on the top side. So often you'll see, for example, prices coming down. They come in, they put in a low on the charts, i.e. they've gone below previous areas of support and they've put in a new extreme low on price action. And if you're also looking at the options flow or the institutional order flow and the stuff coming through from the dark pools, you can see that the direction of their price movement has changed. It's gone up in advance, and in fact they're putting in higher lows or they're putting in new highs. And at the same time, people on retail in live trading are buying it and they're paying less. And you might think, but that means they're getting a bargain. But all that really is this manifestation of this manipulation. The institutions don't want to pay any cheaper for it, right? They've already got everything they possibly wanted. And now retail have to catch up. And you think, well, I'm getting it cheaper because that's better. But actually, for every buy, there's a sell. And so when you're winning buying that low, there's actually somebody else that's being robbed, because they're making decisions based on what they think is all available information. And in fact, it isn't, and people know about this that have got certain access to the information. Well, as retail traders won't have, in so many areas of these alternative trading systems, so many aspects of them are hidden from you and me. You and I, you'll like the reporting period 24 hours on trades and alternative trading systems, so you're not even going to see it till maybe the next day. All this stuff's happening when you're making your own decisions live, and people say, but well, this is the nature of the market, and it's truthfully not the nature of the market. The only reason alternative trading systems even exist was because there was this idea that they would be able to add to the liquidity that's provided in the market, and so liquidity equals capital efficiency, which equals capital accumulation. And so building wealth, this idea of creation of wealth that they think comes from the stock market, they thought they could increase that and add to that flow. And so that's why alternative trading systems were permitted. But then within the trading systems themselves, they now offer, and have done since 2017, and even earlier than that, some very popular ones offer maker-taker exchanges. So if you put an order on the books, i.e. provide liquidity within that exchange, then you'll be rewarded with a rebate of the fees that the person who takes that order from the book by doing a market order, they'll pay a fee. That's a taker fee, and that'll be given a rebate, a percentage of it will be given as the maker fee to the guy who put the order in the book in the first place. And so, in essence, that seems like a great idea, because what's the problem? We're only trying to encourage liquidity. But when you actually think about the dynamics of that situation, what you've gone and done, what you've provided for there is a different mechanism for those liquidity providers to make money. So previous to that, it was that they are providing liquidity that's on either side of the trade, so they can make money in the spread. So that someone wants to buy it for this price, they want to sell it for some other price. You can offer both parts of that trade. You can make the difference in the spread, and you can offset your own risk by taking trades. And that's how market makers operate. And it was how the whole system worked, and it worked very well. But then with alternative trading systems and with the maker-taker exchanges, there then became this secondary reward in that you're just getting the maker fee. And so that was a perversion of the objective of these things in the first place. And that actually takes away from the incentive and motivation for the market makers to close the spread via little exchanges. All of that liquidity happen off exchange leaves to loads of opportunities for manipulation. And then you combine that with the T+2 settlement period and all of the avenues within there to influence and manipulate the markets. It leaves it so that if you're a market maker, you're genuinely left wondering if it is better to just do the job as it was first intended and perform the role just to facilitate a better and more competitive spread, or is it in fact better to just use this huge wealth you've got, clump it all together, reduce the velocity of how you use it, and instead just scrape fees. And so all of that added together with payment for order flow and the order routing that comes from the New York Stock Exchange, for example, and goes into all of these various market makers exchanges, means that there's like you're undermined. You on the other side of the trade are undermined because the people that you're there with aren't people you're necessarily trading with on the other side of the trade. They're actually just people that are looking to scoop money out of your pocket. And so the idea of capital efficiency and capital accumulation is true, but it's only for the huge liquidity provider, and it doesn't benefit the market. And that's been happening for years and years now, and it's getting worse and worse. And because of the three trifecta of problems, the dark pools, the T+2 settlement period, and the payment for order flow, you're seeing this huge problem now manifesting because the motivations of the people on the trades have been completely changed. And the game you thought you were playing is both rigged and itself completely flipped on its head. And then you go in and you think, well, if this is the order flow, if this is the institutional order flow, if this is the option order flow, and this is how retail are performing, and you look at all the different things and you can see, well, actually, long is short for that's in essence, long is short for market makers. And so their motivations were previously just to offset risk are now to direct the flow of money so that it benefits them. And that was never what they were supposed to do. In fact, it's then encroaching on the idea of free markets. It's anti-competitive. It's anti-American. And ironically, a couple of those problems are banned everywhere else in the world apart from in America.
Yeah, no. When you're talking about that trifecta of problems, and I guess these are three of the main things that have been sort of looked at by the apes as such, is dark pools, payment for order flows, and the T+2 settlement date. Now, there's obviously other things that they've been focused on, but every time I look at any of these practices, I get this really weird sense that all that they're doing is creating like shadows in which people can operate and scrape out extra cash from the system. It feels like they've all been perhaps not engineered that way, but they're all being abused to create opacity in the markets and leave it so that only the biggest traders are the ones who can take advantage of these systems. Like, is that a fair assessment?
That's exactly what it is. They've created an environment where only the exclusive and privileged few will be able to take advantage. They've also cornered markets and done that with their own huge wealth. They've managed to corner aspects of the market makers and other parts of the value chain, which lead to further conflicts of interest. And it's true, and when I first started in the industry, I was surprised that there would be a constant flow of people. Like, what it takes is there needs to be a constant flow of people losing money. And I was wondering, like, how come this doesn't stop? How come people don't realize that on some levels they're being scammed? And I could see myself that it was possible to do the job, and it's possible to trade and make money and pay your bills, and I'm an example of it. But at the same time, I know that it's very difficult, and people just jump straight in and lose money a lot. And why does that keep happening? And I asked, and the people that are experienced, 60, 70 years old, still doing the job because they enjoy it, they all say exclusively, there's a new idiot born every minute. And while that isn't necessarily true, it is the inflection of an arrogant, gluttonous person, of somebody who lives in a solipsistic world, who thinks that their life's more important than other people and thinks it's okay to be exploitative. And they build systems upon that exploitation. And so I say the markets are very dangerous. Like, there's few places and few environments in the world with infinite risk, but the markets are one of them. Infinite danger, infinite risk. And now that cryptocurrency is around, it's 24/7, 7 days a week. You can lose your money, your life savings, and possibly more in an instant. And there's very few places you can do it. And I don't think that the way to treat people who enter that market is to identify them by default as an idiot. And if you are doing that and not trying to help, you're on the wrong side of that, of history there. And you've only got one life. And are you going to live that life in such a meaningless, exploitative way? Or are you going to do something worthwhile with your time? And they believe that what they're doing is worthwhile because they've got exclusively profit-driven values, and they don't mind in that sense that you take advantage of other people. And so, yeah, it's like totally natural for them to look and find and create these dark corners that they'll be able to get that little extra advantage. And they do it in ways that we don't yet know. They've done it in other ways that they've been exposed recently, with the different ways they move certain debt obligations around. And we've also seen that over the history of the last 10, 20 years, the revolving door between regulatory industries and these huge companies who can just afford to buy out the person who was previously set up all the rules to stop them acting nefariously, and then therefore have on tap all of the answers on how to avoid them and get around them. And you see it commonly, and I mean, we've seen it here recently in the UK with David Cameron. You know, despite the fact that he can perform gratuitous sexual acts on a pig when he's at university, he can still get to be the Prime Minister of our country. And then despite that, afterwards, he can still raise tens of millions of pounds through public money for his friends' businesses in a way that provide really inadequate and frankly, dangerous levels of providing of the service that they've been contractually obliged to provide. So, you know, you think like, how can we deal with it in the financial industry, which is very undemocratic? Well, we can't even deal with it in our own communities. You know, we can't deal with our own leaders being that way. So, are people corruptible? Yes. Does power corrupt? Fucking right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, my take on the pig thing was always that the fact that came out was to me just a suggestion that was the very best of what had happened, like the least awful.
Yeah,
and
because you
like,
in that industry, you would never give all of your blackmail away, would you? You just threaten the person with a little bit of something.
Yeah, and the point of those sorts of acts was to like make them all or bind them all to like the secrets that they hold on each other. And yeah, which is quite horrifying that these are the people running the country. But
still,
but a lot of the things you're talking about there are and the stuff that you mentioned sort of a little earlier on is, I'm sure you're probably maybe not aware of the interview that was done with Jim Cramer from I don't think it was meant to ever be released to the public, and I think it was called the Street Insider. And he basically explains, and I got a bunch of quotes here from him, how a hedge fund can try and manipulate a price. And he said that it's just a fun game. And, you know, you can create yourself an impression that a stock is down, but you know, you're not meant to, but you do it anyway because the SEC doesn't understand it. And then he goes on to delineate how you might disseminate FUD as such, like you call up a few journalists and call a few traders, and it just sort of, I think he gave the example of Apple, and you just call someone up and be like, oh, well, you know, I heard Apple or Verizon aren't going to carry the new iPhone. Apple are being a bit, you know, they're not playing ball. And then all of a sudden they call someone else, and then the kind of, that just seeps out, and you haven't spent any money, just as you said. All you've had to do was just make a few phone calls, and then like he said that you could take like a little bit of money and create a level of activity that would make it seem like maybe things might happen, and like, it's all just smoke and mirrors, really. And maybe this is like how it's always been, but I think one of the things about this sort of the movement, like the apes as such, has been to all of these people I feel have gone, or almost all of them have gone through the same journey as myself over the past 6 or 7 months, is to realize the level to which this is the norm. And it's pretty stunning when you really find out
It's worse. It's so enraging, is what it is. You know, I mean, I've seen it so many different sides of it, and started YouTube partly with the idea of here's a channel that'll tell people what it's like from somebody who's done that side of it. You know, not necessarily any better. I mean, there are much better traders than me, but somebody who's got this experience professionally and has done it like this way for this amount of time, and I've got a good way of delivering the message, I feel, so I put it across like this, and I would talk about trading, risk management, technical analysis, and my particular way of doing things from my professional experiences relies heavily on looking at open interest. So that was always the way I talked about things, and then GME comes into my attention partly because of that focus on open interest and how it looked, which speaks directly to the manipulation that was then later revealed. And so I was doing the YouTube videos, and the whole point of my channel was about helping people get to a degree of financial literacy, and then so that they could, you know, self-empowerment, and then via self-empowerment you can change the world around you, and you can change your community. And I think that there is a bit of a degree of a crisis in mental health across the world, especially in young men who feel like that they can't make a difference. And I think it's being exploited by nefarious actors. And I think that people like that really want to make a difference, and unfortunately they're a little bit extra vulnerable. So I feel like there's I came into this idea of putting across a message with that very, very much at the top of my mind, and how to handle the fact that the people who'd be attracted to doing this would also perhaps be quite vulnerable. So I'm very protective. And when I was doing these things, I was obviously looking more and more at GameStop and seeing how roaring Keith Gill was handling it himself, you know, so admirably. And then was watching and doing live streaming the congressional hearing where he was talking about how he perceived the market from a perspective of a retail trader, and the whole thing was set up in quite what felt to be quite an accusatory manner, and directed at him and the retail, when it had only happened because Vlad and Ken had made sure allegedly had made sure the buy button disappeared. So I was watching that congressional hearing, and to that point, most of my message had been delivered in a humorous tone, and I'd never really got that angry. And it got to the point where somebody asked Roaring Kitty how many people were in the room with him, and of course he said he was alone. And then they asked Ken Griffin how many people were in the room with him, and he said, I think 8 or 9. And those 8 or 9 people were clearly highly paid lawyers who were making sure he said exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. And I got so angry that imbalance in the markets had made its way to Congress and was facing down a guy just like you or me in an incredibly intimidating environment, when he was, to many people, an example of how you can change your life and change the world. And I felt like, you think you're going to do this? You think you're going to get away with this? Like, no, he's not alone. He might be in his room alone, but there are millions of us in rooms alone across the world. Millions of us. And we're coming for you.
Yeah, that is a fucking powerful message. It's. I think you're right that the hearing was very accusatory, but one of the things that really stood up was how he handled that. It was like there was ice in the man's veins. He was so calm. He had like, I just and I've started one of the chapters of the book just talking about the fact that he was able to like insert a meme in amidst being like accused of market manipulation and leading this charge against Wall Street because, you know, how dare the individual, you know, try and do the same reckless gambling that, you know, hedge funds have been getting away with. And he's just like, yeah, I am not a cat. I was just like, this is incredible. and it's like amidst these accusations and an environment that, you know, might see some serious impacts upon not just the US market but the global markets, and he's decided to make a joke about it. And which I find to be the most stunning part of the whole thing. And it was amazing to watch that combination as well of the powerful moment, and that this like really consequential thing that was happening, and he was just throwing a joke in there, and it was the perfect embodiment of the whole movement. That it was a serious thing, but, you know, we can have a few jokes in there at the same time.
Yeah, the crack. It's like having the crack, you know. Reminds me of Ireland, you know, like speaking truth to power, but doing it in a humorous way. Because what else can you do when you're faced with literal tragedy all over the world? And there's this problem with certain people, this huge imbalance that certain people are doing, and he's there. And it's so obvious that that imbalance is now taking its way right up to the very top. And there he is, sat there, doing that, and that. What a legend that he was able to handle it in that way. I don't know if I would have been able to constrain my emotions as well as he did. It was fantastic. And a really good reflection on, as we call them, and as we're obviously known now, as the apes. Not really positive reflection. And it's like, we're lucky to have people like you who are articulate and trenchant and are able to communicate that moment as it happened, and for the importance that it was, because it will become a cultural touchstone. You know, it's like the map to a modern revolution nowadays. I mean, revolution's maybe too strong a word, but he's a renegade, and he's making a difference in the world around him. And again, not just through his own ability to change to change his financial environment. Like, he's literally changed the world. And in that sense, he's such a huge inspiration, you know. And we're lucky to have people like yourself who are documenting it. Because if you weren't, you know, people would be using it for their own agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to do my best to figure out, because I think that anyone that's not encased within the movement at the minute is almost oblivious to how significant this is. And like, my mum like gets asked, it's like, oh, what's Josh doing at the minute? It's like, oh, he's writing a book, but I've no idea what it's about. And I'm like, right, fair enough. Like, I'm not going to try and sit down and explain it to you. But how significant do you think this moment is for the future of for the whole of like the developed world almost? I think it's because the ripples will spread out, and because GameStop is still, I think, the most widely held stock across most of Europe, Australia, parts of Asia. I don't know about South America actually, but it's the reach is incredible. But how important do you see this moment being?
Well, I've had a number of false dawns, and I've often looked at these sorts of, you know, when you hope for change, and then the zenith of your hope is also when it dies. You know, like you see the new elected official get in, and you've put so much faith in what they've had to say, what they've said, and then either it's their own perspective seems to change, or the gears of power are just so slow to move, or those agencies that are supposed to represent and protect you ultimately have other agendas and other stakeholders whose own goals are conflicting with your own. And so I've had that feeling before myself, and think that also as a trader, you're very much better off if you're able to remove the x-axis. You know, if there is no timeline on your success, then it's like, let's call it like Schrodinger's cat, we'll never be defeated. The apes around Germany, France, Britain, everyone that's holding in Scotland, you think they're going to paper hand for Kenny G? Literally not going to happen. Japan, Korea, Africa, everywhere that people hold it, they are doing it for more than just profit. So defeat is not an option. Even if we wanted to give up, we couldn't, because we're being constantly exploited all the time. There is no giving up and going to some peaceful settlement. It's complete and utter surrender at this point. The markets have been so perverted and so undermined by these main big players that it just will not go on. The status quo is not acceptable. That's the bottom line for us. People say, what's the floor? It was 1,000, then it was for 69,000, then it was 1 million, then it was 2 million, then it was 5, then it was 7, then it was 10, then it was 15, then it was 19.5, and then it was 20 and jail. There's no way people are going to give up on this moment, on this movement, on this chance, on this fight, this time, their time. People aren't going to pass that up so they can go and play PlayStation. In fact, they'll buy extra PlayStations to make sure that it happens. And I don't think that we should look at it and say, will this be the moment? This is our time. There will not be another time. Of all of the different injustices, of all of the communities that are downtrodden, that are pushed around, of all of the prejudices that are put into society to control different groups, all of them are made worse by this problem. Everybody who's in any struggle is in this struggle, and it's our fight, and we're fighting together. And whether we like it or not, we're on the same side. Since starting this, I've met people who I would have had no occasion to ever contact or speak to in my entire life, and perhaps would have assumed I wouldn't get on with. Hundreds of them who I'd now say are some of my closest friends. Thousands of them who I respect and would never betray. Millions of them who I'd stand behind if they were in a fight, stand at their side, stand in front of them. There's nothing I would abandon people that have got into this with me for, and I know that other people feel the same. So I don't think that if it matters if we think about when or if. I think it's now, I think it's permanent, I think it's our fight, and I think we cannot give up. It doesn't matter about winning, it's just about never giving up. Never. Because the fight in truth will take multiple generations. The enemy is so insidious that they live within us. Not just figuratively, but literally among us are many bad actors. They're on the sponsorship and behest of our enemies. And so we have to keep going. There is no defeat. There is no surrender. This is our time. This is our fight.
Man, you're getting me all riled up. Like, maybe it's the Scottish accent. I'm getting like Braveheart flashbacks, but you're yeah. And I think you're right. I don't think that people will give up. Like, the community has internalized that as well. It's like, don't talk about dates. And it started as something where maybe a lot of people were jumping in and going, well, it could be a couple of weeks, then we're going to have the squeeze and it's all going to be over. But now it's become so much more than that. It's moved beyond just like this tiny little get rich quick scheme. The education that we were talking about of people has exposed to them the level of fraud, and they've decided that this is their hill upon which they're willing to die. And like, maybe not literally, but it's so incredible to watch it happen, because people are there, and they're not just like saying, here's the position that I hold, I'm going to hold it. They're going, give me more. Come on. Like, let's like stack this big sort of boxes of TNT that we're preparing for the global financial markets. It's just like, come on, like, give me some more. Like, give me some more. It's like, which is stunning in itself, is that people, that there's been there's so much anger as well in the movement, but like so much positivity at the same time. It's incredible to witness, and I think the thing that the hedge funds or Kenny G or whatever doesn't get is that they're not fighting people. And this is like the thing that I'm still trying to figure out quite how to articulate it. It's like they're fighting a bunch of individuals who are already angry at the system, but who are LARPing as the apes that never give up, who don't know what they're doing. They just buy and hold. And you can't defeat people who are playing a meme, because you can't kill a meme. Like, people tried to shut down Pepe the Frog, but it's still everywhere. Like, you cannot, it doesn't matter how insidious that idea is. And this one is not like anywhere near the level of like sort of controversy that Pepe the Frog was. This is a beautiful idea.
I love the way you describe it there, LARPing and beautiful. And that's exactly what it is. No, and some people quite reasonably and understandably find my way of communicating to be quite aggressive. And it's true, it is. You know, I do advocate for financial violence against these entities. I do think that that would have a powerful message, and it would send, like, it would echo, you know, not just making the shorts cover, which is like, you know, getting them back on the path of righteousness. No, I want to, those who found the speckles in our eyes but can't see the mote of their own, I want them destroyed. Mm-hmm. I want that destruction to be all fire on that hill that we committed to, that's seen all over the markets. And like you say, it is a meme, you know, and that's so true what you say, they're indestructible. The more you try to get rid of a meme, the more funnier it gets and the more it comes back. You know, it wasn't like we're a natural born reaction to these guys. You know, it forms every part of our life. The meme culture that's come around was our generation. And they don't understand it, nor do they understand us. And they think that they can fight us by employing those tactics and psychological warfare against us that worked against the boomers. Those people who grew up with very different opportunities to the subsequent couple of generations. And at this stage, you know, it's like that phrase, we've got nothing to lose. You know, you've already taken away all of our freedoms and opportunities. You control our idea of free will and free choice, and you try to shut down our memes. You know, yeah. How else do we fight back against this, you know, and how often does it stand still and give us the opportunity to do so? Yeah, there really isn't much opportunity for the. Yeah, we've people have found their revolution, because I can't, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's like you start, like, first people will like they'll try the revolution at the ballot box, and when that doesn't work, they'll go for the soapbox and they'll preach on the street, and when that doesn't work, then they'll turn to the financial world, and then I can't remember what the box that they say is, and then the final one is the Tinder box, and we're slowly moving along that like progression, but yeah, I think people have found their, like, this is where we stand moment, which is beautiful. Again, like we said, to watch. You kind of mentioned like the psychological warfare aspects. To what extent do you think that there has been like the conversation manipulated? Because I'm speaking to a couple of former mods at the minute, and they've been very helpful in trying to figure this out. And I've also spoken to Alexander Cohen, who is currently, to your point about how this moves forward, building the terminal with Dave Lauer, which is going to be like the central hub where they want it to be for providing retail investors with the same level of information that hedge funds have access to, and building like a Reddit-esque platform. I think they called it OnlyFans for Finance.
in order to give people the power to fight back beyond just this. They're interested in building on this revolution, which is super interesting. But yeah, sorry. What extent do you think that conversation has been manipulated online?
Yeah, it's very difficult to perceive, you know. It's what do they call it? Doppler effect. You can only really notice it in how people react to you, or in the absence of certain types of evidence. It's very difficult to know as and when at the time. I know a number of times I've been sucked into conversations on the internet, whether that be live on my stream or on a different social media platform, with someone who seems to have genuinely good intentions. They come from a place of hoping to dispel ignorance, their own ignorance, and they present it as a question to you. And then they try to pick apart your response. And initially, you know, when you direct your attention to these people, you try to be helpful. So you give them like maybe a bite size, a takeaway bit of information, or you don't understand the full extent of what they don't know. So you're approaching it with some information you imagine to be helpful. But of course, inevitably, it's not the whole story. And then they'll try to like put things and say, oh yeah, but this, oh yeah, but that. And you know, you find yourself having an hour-long conversation on the internet when only meant to be a response to someone's tweet, or a quick conversation when you were out having a live stream, where that person is deliberately putting out false information, which, had they the level of investigative interest that would be necessary to dictate this conversation they're currently having with me, then they would definitely already be aware of this little bits of information. And at that stage, it's obvious to me in the back and forth, but to the people who also have just arrived and don't know what's going on, it can seem that because the person's being reasonable and they're asking polite questions, that perhaps their intentions are good, when actually it's just to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in your mind, you as the audience, because they know they're not going to change my mind. And that's like a very small and relatively trivial example. There's also people who have got like people with lots and lots of followers who may or may not have a financial background before, who control lots of people's thoughts and dictate like certain levels. They'll even jump in and be quite enthusiastic and pro GME for a period of time, and then once they've got some credibility, turn around and say, shucks, you know, it just isn't going to happen, or something far more destructive and far more dishonest. You see that all the time, and it's led to so much fragmentation too, because of the nature of these bad actors. It's led to fragmentation. It's led to degrees of paranoia. It's led to people being less open to talking to each other, and that's the ultimate effect that side of the trade is going for. They don't necessarily want to convince me, and they don't necessarily want to convince you, but if they can divide and conquer, then maybe their narrative will win out. And so it's very much within their interests. You know how you referenced Kramer's interview, which I have indeed seen, but I couldn't remember. But you were saying things about it, about who's phoning traders and journalists and that. And I did remember something about that.
I'll link it in the description for people.
Yeah, good shout. Just as he did that, the same thing happens here. With these people trying to control the narrative, trying to change people's opinions. And ultimately, prices are driven by speculation. So if there's more and more negative speculation, or there's speculation that proves then to be disappointing, that all plays into the hands of people on the other side of the trades, which is partly where this idea of like no dates comes from. You know, like, well, let's manage our own expectations. But like you say, like we were talking earlier, if you just completely remove the x-axis from that at all and say, well, this is a permanent war that we can't ever give up and we'll never forgive, then you're maybe less susceptible to it. And I found it very difficult myself to counter this conversation, because it does, like when you're doing a live stream, and especially when it might have lots and lots, thousands and thousands and thousands of people watching, and it's like a Q&A sort of vibe, then you'll get so many questions, and it's hard to differentiate between the people who genuinely want to understand and those who've got some sort of agenda. It's very, very difficult, and you usually only learn later when you see that same username or sock puppet or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes it is a genuine person pop up somewhere else, and they've got a different story, they've got a different narrative, or they're pushing some other, and you think, well, that's just not consistent, and those sort of like stuff like that happens all the time. And then, I mean, I don't know how many emails I've got, an awful lot of them. More than any other topic that people have got in touch with me via email about is PR companies that ask me to stop talking about GameStop and offer to pay me to talk about these other things. Often they're perfectly normal things that I would talk about anyway, but the exclusive part of the agreement is that I'm not to talk about GameStop, and that their email often concludes phrases such as "without prejudice," and then you'll check where that PR firm comes from, and it's like, it's a mailing address, and the website was created in January this year, and they probably aren't really a PR firm. In fact, if they are, they're operating on behalf of some umbrella organization, and so much of that, plus all the fake social media profiles, and then the causing the fractious nature between various groups. And it might be people within the GME communities online, which sounds silly, but there are millions and millions of people across these different communities, and they are very serious places. There's also people like in AMC that will say negative things about GME, or people in GME who say things about AMC that's over and above the truth of the narrative, and is intentionally designed to cause problems between people. So you and I were talking briefly at the start, before we started filming, about AMC and GME and different aspects and positive things about both of them. And there's people out there instead, though, who will be saying things just to make people think one is better than the other, exclusively so that they can control the next thought that person has. And so it's a very good idea, I find, if anybody tries to tell you something, or they don't have evidence, or you're suspicious of them, to just discount it, ignore them, and go somewhere where you'll get better information. You don't have to take everything in from everybody, and if somebody seems weird, ignore it. And I've found that to be my approach now, is the information with regards to why this is all happening is out there. There are aspects to it that you could illuminate on. You could explain, where it is that perhaps that debt obligations are moved around, how they hide certain things at different places, and you can illuminate and enlighten certain aspects of the conversation for people. But people who come in and they've got this idea that it's just impossible, and that it's never going to happen, and that if it was going to happen, it wouldn't be people like you and I that were able to make that difference. This level of FUD, sometimes backed by another real person, or sometimes this is just some individual with that opinion. The way I feel that I've decided to respond to it is to say that it's akin to the price targets that a lot of people are looking at for this thing, is that they're not within the realms of reason anymore. We're not going to get sucked into this conversation of what's reasonable, because what's reasonable is actually what's going to be dictated to you by somebody who thinks they know what's best for you, and then on top of that thinks they have a better understanding of realistic and what you deserve and how your life should work. And the truth is, that's not the way it is. Reason's overrated in that sense. You don't have to reason with people. It's not your obligation to enlighten everybody. If they don't understand, that's on them. And so I say we're never, ever, ever going back to reasonable land.
No sell, no sell, I think is the phrase we're using now. But would you mind sharing a few screenshots of some of those emails with me? I'd be really intrigued to see what they're saying.
Sure. Probably best to send them over after they're not on the screen. But yeah,
no, not right
I will
now,
do that.
just,
sure. Yeah, I was also talking with somebody else who I'd met through the subreddit I run there, who was looking into the IP addresses where these are all coming from, and that, because they're so very similar, even the email templates, they just got like a slightly different header color or whatever, and they've got a different registered address, and you're like, but this is the chances of this being from somebody else, So I've got somebody trying to help me look into do that sort of thing and see, is it all actually coming from the same place? Because that would be very strange. But yeah, I'll happily share that stuff with you. It'd be good to get your...
Yeah, and I'd love to be able to, because it's part of the trouble of trying to write this book is that it's trying to parse out the real from the fake, and that is seeing, because people can accuse hedge funds of doing this, but to see like actual evidence of it is a whole another kettle of fish.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more question? I know.
Go for it,
I've
Josh.
quite a lot of your time. So I'd hoped we'd get to some more sort of like technical things. This has been far exceeds the sort of conversation I thought we were going to have. It's been wonderful to be able to talk to you, and your advocation for people maybe don't like get what the Scottish and Irish are like. They can seem very aggressive. People said your method of communication was quite aggressive. But I mean, I guess it's like, that's very standard in, I don't know what it is, in Celtic places.
Yeah, right. I mean, we save our greatest insults for our friends. You know, that's who we are. You know, we wouldn't bother going out of our way to annoy somebody we didn't care about.
Yeah, it's far more
but that's
fun
just a joke. Yeah, it's just banter, isn't it? I mean, you recognize that when you live somewhere freezing cold and your opportunities are cut very short, and perhaps, you know, especially in places like Ireland, with the history of that island and the people that live there and the conflicts between different communities, and then this new generation of people that are born into other people's problems, you know, how do you handle that whole thing without a degree of like humor and perhaps maybe a tough streak?
Yeah. I mean,
fire away. I mean, I'm happy to answer more technical questions too, whatever you want to talk about, Josh.
So like one of the things that I'm currently looking at for writing is the number of accusations there has been of hedge funds using ETFs to hide their short positions, essentially. And I spoke very early on in my writing to Lily Frankus, who is the head or an analyst, at least at someone high up in Salience Capital. So they have like a program that's called the NOPE chart, and it looks at options markets. And don't ask me more information, because that's as much as I understand about what they're doing. But she told me that she didn't really believe that this was a possibility, that there was no way that hedge funds were like shorting ETFs, buying the other, going in, exchanging it for the underlying securities, and then go in and buying the other side of the trade for every single share except, say, GME and AMC, and using that to both short the stock and like kick the can down the road. She basically was like, that's not happening. Do you think that that's a possibility of it happening? And have you seen any evidence that you think that's actually real?
Well, I would say that I respect that opinion a lot, you know, and I've had the same conversation with myself. How would it be possible for this to happen without the fund managers that are responsible for those ETFs knowing about it? But before I draw any conclusion on it, I'd say that it's good to talk about what these things are and how the mechanism perhaps is being used, and is it possible? And I think if you investigate it, you can see that it is possible. It just might rely on a degree of collusion, but you don't know. And so you can't go draw conclusions. You can say, though, if you understand the failure to deliver thing, right, they're created in two main ways, of course. They're created through the non-settlement of options contracts or naked shorting. And the resultant FTD, the debt held by the defaulter, or the failure to receive, which is what it is on the counterparty, that's you, the retail trader normally, that failure to deliver is priced at a mark-to-market rate and deducted from the debtor's total collateral. So holding an FTD is negative to your trading position, especially if it's there and obvious. And so are they being hidden in these ETFs, these exchange-traded funds? Not all that different from mutual funds that I used to work on. Exchange-traded funds are a basket of securities, and if you own shares in that ETF, then you own a proportion of that underlying portfolio. And that's how exchange traded funds work. Slightly different from mutual funds in that they're traded all throughout the day, and mutual funds it's like at the end of the day. And so that's all the way these things work. And if you're a manager of an ETF, people assume that they themselves are all completely legit, which mostly they are, but they think that it works in a really intuitive fashion, that if you hold shares in an ETF, then that ETF holds shares in the companies underneath that it says it does, and it holds exactly the right amount to meet all of its obligations at any given time. But the truth is that depending on a particular fund manager's strategy, it may well not work like that. It may well be that they have to purchase or sell shares at any given time in order to meet the underlying benchmarks that control how they operate their fund. And within that, there is an awful lot of opportunity for messing around. Let's put it like that. The same way that within the T+2, you think that means there's 2 days until settlement period. When you actually add it all up, it looks like there's closer to 35. And then you think, well, within those 35 days and these 5 or 6 different operations, it gets to a final decision. What else is happening? And it's that question is interesting. I don't know the answer to it, but I can look, and I did look at, and as it happened, follow along with the evidence and see that as those ETFs were the ones that people talk about, everyone looked at January and they saw the GME share prices go up, and they saw in around the top of the peak that it seemed to be that the failures to deliver for GameStop were going down. The number of them went down, though, by the equivalent amount that they went up in, what was the first one? XRT was the first ETF. Yeah. And then people were like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't quite add up. And then they looked across and saw that IWM, the iShares ETF, it was like, there's your missing amount, and it added up nearly perfectly, and it was kind of suspicious. And then in April, when the FTDs and GME seemed to go down again at that one point where I was looking at these things in open interest, and I saw both of them go down currently, and I was like, what's going on with open interest there, and what's going on with these FTDs? And looked back and saw, again, it was the same story, that while the dollar value of the FTDs was dropping more than the price, which would suggest that the FTDs themselves were being closed, there was actually, across the ETF market that holds GameStop, that was also then going up again by the equivalent dollar amount. So there's 2 parts to that then I look at and think, a question. The first is, would it be possible for these people to go through the machinations of shorting every, go long on every other one in that fund and short this one, and then swap out securities from different trades into different places? And I know that it's difficult, but it's possible. If you've got collusion from fund managers, it's a whole lot easier. It's so easy that it would be silly to say that it isn't happening. So you'd have to look at the people in those particular funds, those particular ETFs, and those particular people working on them. And I think they'd be a great place to direct your questions, Josh. And I can tell you that there's people, qualified and experienced people, who also look at it, that fact, with great suspicion, and who I would have spoken to about this in January and February, who say, like the people you spoke to, say, that's unlikely. I just don't see it. Now saying about this other factor, when you show them the evidence, they say, that's very unusual. And, well, they won't commit to saying that you're right, because this correlation isn't necessarily proof, obviously. It's very suspicious. And I think that it's well worth further investigations in that. And if it does prove to be true that people that administer and fund associates, executives, managers, then ETFs have been colluding with investment banks to add to their underlying portfolios in such a way that they're taking perhaps FTDs as opposed to, or synthetic shares as opposed to others, that would be suspicious too, because the mechanism for FTDs isn't like here's this black hole, where it's not like Swan Station on Lost where everything gets printed out and sent through a little tube and then goes out into a big hole at the back of nowhere where no one ever reads. I mean, FTDs are a real thing. They're real real debt obligations, and you can, if you're holding an FTR, the other side of an FTD, you can just write to the exchange and notify them that there's been a failure to deliver and that you want a buy-in. And the exchange will then support you in getting your shares elsewhere that you were obligated to receive from the defaulter. And then they'll make the defaulter pay the difference. And if they don't make the defaulter pay the difference because they refuse to acknowledge the buy-in, they'll make their broker pay the difference. And in this trade, they are their own broker. So what we need to do is, if we do find ourselves facing an existential issue with regards to these FTDs, is that we can mobilize, we can take advantage of the systems that are in place at the minute, and we can create a buy-in, a forced buy-in of these FTDs. And that's possible, and there's a lot of FUD out there with people that talk about how you can't do this and FTDs are never going to work, and who knows what people's agenda is in pushing that message. But the truth is that there are mechanisms in place so that debts don't disappear. It's the whole way that this financial system is supposed to work. It's the only thing that you can rely on is forced liquidations and forced recalls. Recalls being the other side of a liquidation. So if you're going short, then you're supposed to have borrowed shares in order to be short. And if it gets to the stage where there aren't very many shares available, then you as the lender of those shares can recall them. You don't even need to give the person notification of it. And that works the same way as a forced liquidation does. And borrowing shares, you're obligated to that contractual agreement that that can happen to you. So if it was that we were able to really, because we can't organize and we can't mobilize and we can't do anything that's against the rules, but if we could be more aware of those other large players and those people that would help facilitate the idea that nobody will be left holding some FTD that won't in the end mean that their credit is what their due is given. There are mechanisms we can take. There are things we can do, and having all of these different communities online where people can communicate with each other and advise each other on the best way to make their own decisions means that even if they are trying to hide it, we'll find it. Even if they do think they can get away with it, we'll catch them. And there's nowhere they can hide. Sure, they can hide their short positions temporarily, but they can't hide themselves, and that's why you say, like, it goes from one box to the other and it ends up at the tinder box. Neely said it ends up the box that you used to throw through their window, but that's what happens, the natural consequence of things is such that the truth comes out and people hold the power, and us can speak the truth to power, whether it be on a box or with a box.
Yeah. That seems like a really nice place to end it. On last yes or no question, actually, does retail own the float?
Does retail own the float? Retail owns the float. I've seen evidence with my own eyes to say that retail owns the float 350%. I've seen evidence other people have collated that looks like they own the float 900%. And then I've seen evidence that other people I trust believe in that says that there could be significantly more than that. And one thing I'd like to say, Josh, just to end this, my contribution here is to thank everybody that helped me get the platform I have in the first place. And one of them is yourself, recently coming on my show, helping me talk about these things in a way to other people and get your way of communicating out there, which everybody loved. Thanks so much. And then all the other people that have been involved in GameStop and helping, and everyone who's on a mission to make sure that to help people change the world, and none above all than my brother Rocky, who started his own YouTube channel, inspired me to start mine, and I wouldn't be here without him. So thanks, Rocky, and thanks, Josh, and thanks everybody else.
No problem, man. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.
The animal dragged a child around its enclosure. The child had fallen into that enclosure. Officials are now defending their actions. ABC's Alex.
A few things I am not. I am not a cat. I am not an institutional investor. Nor am I a hedge fund.
There's no panic selling. These people, they may have bought at $4, sat through $400, went back to 40, went to 350, back down to 110, and they have not sold. All they've done is bought more. And there's no answer for that. There's no, it is like art of war mastery by a bunch of idiots who should know better. And they're just like, I'm not fucking leaving.
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars.
What's been happening on Reddit and in social media and in the marketplace has never been seen before.
To short 70, 60, 80% of a company, let alone 140%, I think a lot of people universally believe something is wrong there.
They're powerful. They want a stock higher. It's child's play. Why ever sell into the maw of Wall Street, Reddit bets? Why?
But everyone's wrong. It's like the Big Short again. Or more like the Big Short Squeeze this time, right?
So here we got the fox guarding the hen house, and one of the hens is complaining the fox is out to kill us, and the farmer says, I'm sorry, the fox is in charge of the hen house.
Whenever there is not billions, but like trillions of dollars involved in something, I argue that nothing is off the table.
The way they have absolutely cheated, stolen, robbed everyday people so all our hedge fund billionaire friends can get out and not get killed is one of the most remarkable, illegal, shocking robberies in the history, in plain sight.
Superstonk and the other communities that have emerged are a hive mind, the likes of which we have never seen before. It's madness and brilliance, insanity and genius all rolled into one. It's very possible that Citadel will be gone in a few months. And not just Citadel, but the entire financial system has the potential to come crashing down. These crooks continue to gamble recklessly with the world economy, and this could be the moment that they finally get their justice.
You've got maybe 10 million people doing this who now own, probably more than 100 million shares. And eventually, they might own everything.